People who've been or are going to therapy, what is the one most important thing your therapist told you that stuck with you till this day? Napoleon's greatest weakness was he could never stop trying to return to his former glory. I had spent almost a decade trying to get back to situations and feelings I had in my early 20s instead of focusing on different life goals and expectations. I never realized how unhappy I was because I was trying to rebuild a life that was gone instead of trying to build a new and more realistic life. Back when I was still a teen, I was going to therapy for different reasons. But I just had a big fight with my boyfriend at the time. And I was very distraught being a teen, and thus over-dramatizing love, etc. I was talking to my therapist about it, saying I didn't think I could be happy anymore. She asked what did I think I would need in order to be happy. I had the power to just make things happen. What would I do to make myself happy? I said I would make my boyfriend stop being mad at me and come back to me and truly love me, make him grow up a bit and stop the nonsense. Then I'd be happy. She told me that was dangerous, that I was making my happiness depend on someone else's actions, and that I was assuming controlling his actions was the path to my well-being. She said, you had the power to make anything in the world happen for you, and you chose to make things happen for him so that it would impact you. I was a bit defensive at the time, of course, but she doubled down and told me of course, when we love someone we put them before ourselves and we want them to be the best they can be. But there is a healthy limit to that, where we are still in charge of ourselves before anyone else. And that applied to both me and him. I had to be able to find my happiness outside him. He should just add to it. And I had to respect the fact he was his own person and would do and undo things as he saw fit. 15 years later, that session still comes to my mind from time to time. She saved me from being codependent and controlling before it even happened. If I were to talk to others the way I talk to myself, would they be okay with it? No, probably not. I don't have many friends, but if any of them heard anyone say to me what I think about myself sometimes, well, they would be very angry. Not mine, but I saw this video on Instagram and this guy said his therapist told him, despite what you might think, we are not trying to be happy. Really what we are trying to achieve is a state of contentment, rather than striving to be happy all the time. It's this idea where you're at peace, where when we lie down at night we don't have thoughts of I could have done better, but instead ones of I was enough. Happiness is an extreme, like sadness. It's all a spectrum. Not my therapist, but something my friend said to them that changed their life and stuck with me. Think of your coping mechanisms. Now, would you ever tell someone you loved to handle things the way you are handling things? For him it was a gaming addiction. But when he said it to me, it made me think about how I abused alcohol. You have to do the work. We were having a conversation about my depression and anxiety, and in the course of this conversation about changing my meds again, she said you have to do the work. I took from that conversation that there isn't one magic pill or therapy or thing that is just going to fix me. I have to do all the things. I have to do them every day. I have to do the work. I have to exercise. I have to police my own negative thoughts. I have to watch what I eat and drink because sugar affects my mood and I use food to self-soothe, and that's a bad habit. I'm currently in therapy and the main issue we are tackling right now is my drinking. I started drinking at 13 and have been an alcoholic since I was 14, over half my life. And through formative years it is really hard to break this. Right now the most important thing she is saying to me is that I need to treat my addiction like a disease. Treating it like it's a choice has gotten me nowhere, and that way of thinking about it makes it make sense for me to treat it and accept help and take the meds. It also leaves room for compassion, which is really surprising and helpful. Shame is a huge part of why I hid it and never wanted to, couldn't ask for help before. 95% of all of the neuronal activity in the human body is subconscious, that is, you have zero direct control over it, but it's still taking in information and making decisions. If you were driving a car that had very serious mechanical and electrical problems, you couldn't drive in a fashion that would just fix it. It simply doesn't work that way. Most non-functioning addicts approach addiction like this: take a horribly balled up, tangled up, twisted up rope and yank both ends of it as hard and as often as possible in the hopes of it just coming entangled. This is abusing, and unhealthy behaviors. But that doesn't work, and it just makes the knots and tangles even worse and very uncomfortable and non-functional along the way. You must take the rope out of service, release the tension, and carefully work out the knots and tangles. The rope will work very much better after it's untangled, but it takes careful work to do so, and it's not something where there's just a preset recipe for getting it undone. The twists and tangles in your rope are the neglect and trauma you experienced as a child. Those things were not your fault. But unfortunately the developing human brain perceives that treatment as normal because it's all that it has experienced. So your task now is to normalize that thinking and behavior pattern and replace it with a healthier method that can help you make progress in untangling your knot and then getting it back into service. It's like unlearning a bad habit a lot harder than make a healthy habit in the first place. It's a weird one, but I was bitching to mine about X, Y, and Z, and he listened and said, okay, on one hand you were given a raw deal at work and have every right to be resentful. On the other hand, who the duck are you to think that life is fair? Yes, that's verbatim. He was a good shrink because he very quickly learned how to talk to me in a way I'd listen. I'm not sure why that struck me as much as it did, but it totally changed the way I was looking at things. He told me I was a hypocrite. I was dealing with some major guilt after losing a student to suicide a few months prior. I told him I was helping my students get through it by researching the whys, how to prevent, and what they could absolutely control, and what they couldn't. But I wasn't teaching myself those things. I wasn't telling myself what I was telling my students about the situation. You couldn't have stopped it. Only she could. You did everything you could do by being there for her when she was with you. You can't save someone that doesn't want to be saved. Apparently I give really good advice, but don't follow it well. I just had the same thing brought up in my last therapy session. I'm doing EMDR to help with my CPTSD from some horrific childhood abuse. The therapist said to me, if all these things had happened to your wife instead, and she was going through what you are going through, would you tell her that she was to blame for them, or her abusers? Well, of course not. I'd tell her she was amazing and strong and that what they did was totally their fault and not yours. What happened to you was not your fault or responsibility, and you were just a child. Like you, I give really good advice to others, but when it comes to listening to it myself, try to measure the negative thoughts in my mind against the actual evidence. Thought, why bother washing my car when I drive through the wet gravel road to work Monday? It'll be just as dirty. It's pointless. Reality, the car will be nice and clean on the inside. The seats will smell good, and it will be spotless for the weekend. And a little dirty after driving down that road to work. It will still be clean emergency room for a while. Years ago I had trouble making friends because I was kind of a snob. I would always come up with reasons other people were stupid and I didn't want to deal with them. But then I'd complain about being lonely. If I couldn't find the exact right people to become friends with, I just made no friends at all. He told me if I was starving and somebody offered me a little food, I wouldn't turn it down because it wasn't a feast, which made me realize that I needed to be a lot more open-minded about people and accept that everyone has their shortcomings, but they can still make awesome friends. So in this situation, the non-perfect people that I would have otherwise ignored were the small amount of food. LOL. According to her, I'm really good at catastrophizing. My brain makes a little mistake go from just that to the end of the world. One thing she said to me once was, where's the evidence? There was no evidence that the end of my career would come from making one itty bitty tiny mistake during something I'd only been doing for a week and a half. It just stuck with me, and it's something I think about every time I start to spiral into thinking about what could happen. So many different things I could talk about, but this one changed how I saw myself. All of my coping mechanisms, the things that made me bad, were used to save me at some time in my life. They were necessary to get what I need in the environment I grew up. I just don't need them anymore. In a healthy environment they are not necessary. That made me so much more compassionate towards myself and understand mental illness a lot more. I really needed self-compassion to progress in therapy at all. I actually had the "it's not your fault" scene from Good Will Hunting for real. Different background to Will, though. Short story is I fell into a depression during high school as a result of my parents trying to force me to be more disciplined in school by removing all distractions leisure when I was at home. Literally, study, eat and sleep, no entertainment, no friends, no movies, TV, books, magazines, nothing that wasn't related to school. Obviously I became unhappy and focused less on school. Did worse. Parents doubled down and I deteriorated. And I spiraled downward, going to therapy in my mid-20s. This has all come out in the session. And it's been rough. But I've been composed. She tells me that how this all wasn't my fault. Like Will in the movie. I don't really accept it and kinda brush it off. She repeats herself. And I say yeah I know. But I could have been better. She says no. You were still a kid. And too young to understand what was happening. Your parents knew. It wasn't your fault. And then I went all blubbery. Pretty much just like Will. Like a floodgate had opened. I have been sexual assaulted multiple times. I've heard every victim blaming statement you can think to make. My therapist told me the reason most people do that is because if they accept that I did nothing wrong it will shatter their view on the world. Much the same way being attacked did for me. If they blame me for the things that happened then they can go on living in that little bubble where the world isn't scary and unsafe. They don't have to face the fact that bad things happen to good people. I have issues with control in my life and I used to ignore anything that I knew would be out of my control even a little bit. My therapist used an example. She had a small office with a window on the opposite side. She said imagine there is a flood outside of this door. And it's starting to rise. You could continue to let that water rise outside the door until it breaks down the door or you finally open the door and you get rushed with water then you're struggling to stay above water. Or you could open the window, open the door, and stand on the desk and let the water flow in and flow out. Your feet may get a little wet, but it will pass. And you control how you get through that. That really helped put things in perspective for me. I make it worse for myself by letting my anxiety of being out of control get the best of me. I can confront it head on before it builds and gets worse, or I can drown. Am I terrible? Because my first thought was I'd just open the window and climb out. Then I won't get wet at all. Then figured their office might have been on the 5th floor or something. Then thought that, if that was the case, water wouldn't be rising outside the door unless the entire building had been flooded that high. Which means the water outside would probably be that high too. And all I could do was get to the roof. And yeah, I think I overthink things. LOL. People can be imperfect at times. This is fresh but it really stuck. I have many a very controlling behavior, so I really suffer when someone around me is not perfect. For example, wakes up late because it's tired, or arrives late, or puts time and effort in things I consider meaningless, and as a result there's a negative impact on my life on which I have no control. This concept kind of hit me because it takes the "I'm angry and in panic because I'm not in control" and redirects it to "shit happens," or at least goes in that direction. Mine was more of a reaction than something she explicitly stated. My current therapist was previously my couples counselor before that epically failed through no fault of the therapist. When relaying some of the stuff my now ex had put me through, she closed her eyes, winced, and was obviously trying very hard not to literally facepalm at my ex's antics. It really drove the point home that I was not overthinking leaving him, nor was it all in my head. He confirmed for her my statements during the group therapy session, so it's not like my account was incorrect. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing for more videos.